Without question, of all the episodes we're going to look at in Characters of Christmas, this is the one that's going to create the most discussion. And for good reason. There are so many aspects to the shepherds and to the story being communicated in Luke 2 that we haven't totally understood in context, and we've gotten wrong. And we need to understand what's going on there in order to realize how spectacular it was that the angels first showed up to shepherds and what that means for us during the Christmas season. All right, we're jumping right in with an incredibly well-known passage. Here we go. In the same region, there were some shepherds staying out in the fields and keeping watch over their flock at night. All right, I'm so giddy, by the way. It's gonna be so much fun unpacking this. We're starting with the word shepherds, because when we hear the word shepherds, for many of us, we kind of lump this idea into one overarching concept of shepherding. But in the first century world, there are actually two different types of shepherds. The first is what we call semi-nomadic shepherds. These are shepherds who do not live in a particular village. They live in tents, and they are semi-nomadic. They are moving throughout the country during the year based on the time of year and the weather patterns. And their only interaction with village life is to trade products or to get information, but by and large, they are just out and about and they have rights to graze throughout the country. The second type of shepherd is what we just simply call village shepherds. And these are shepherds that live within a village and then usually take out the flock during the day and generally bring the flock back at night. This can be a shepherd of a small flock connected to a family, or this could be a shepherd or multiple shepherds who have a flock that comprise several families' animals, and they go out in order to lead the flock. When we read that we have shepherds who are staying out in the fields, and I'll help you to understand this phrase in a moment, the kind of shepherds we are dealing with is almost certainly village shepherds. Now, when it says that they're staying out in the fields, this word fields is not referring to orchards. It's referring to grain fields, being that of barley and wheat. And so when we're told that this is all happening in around Bethlehem, this makes total sense because in Hebrew, Bethlehem is Bethlehem, which means house of bread. Bethlehem was always known for its bread. And again, we're dealing with barley and we're dealing with wheat. Now, the location of Bethlehem helps us to better understand this reality and the unfolding story of where the shepherds are. So this is a unique geographical feature in the southern part of Israel where you have these demarcated areas where the geography is different. So starting on the coast, you have the coastal plain that's really flat, and then you have this area known as the Shfela or Shefela. It means lowlands or foothills, and those are smaller hills that then rise to the high hill country where Jerusalem is located, where Bethlehem is located. In fact, let me show you where Bethlehem is. And then it drops off into the Judean desert that descends all the way down into the Rift Valley, the lowest place on earth. And so Bethlehem sits right on the cusp of the hill country going into the Judean desert. And you can see that clearly in this photo here, that this is the ancient part of Bethlehem, and just to the east, you can see that Judean desert, and just outside of Bethlehem, the fields start to level out, and this is where you have your grain fields, and also this is where the shepherds would be taking their flock. Now, as we'll learn, that as the grains are growing, you don't have your flocks in the field because they destroy the fields. And so the shepherds, based on the time of the year, would graze either nearby if all the grain fields have been harvested, or actually would go further to the east. And as you go further east, the weather gets better, especially in the winter time. So we have these shepherds who are staying out in the fields, and then we have this other piece keeping watch over their flock at night. And that is a key phrase that locks us in also to the time of year. And to understand that, I need you to walk through with me this agricultural calendar. And typically what we have in Israel are two seasons. We have a rainy season and we have a dry season. The rainy season goes from roughly mid-October to mid-April. And then from mid-April to mid-October is the dry season. And when we're dealing with the rainy season, it begins with what we call the early rains or the fall rains. And these fall in October and in November. And when you have these early rains, it allows the soil to soften and allows you to begin the process of plowing your field in anticipation of the sowing season, which happens during the month of November. And then you have your heavy winter rains, which are December, January, and February. And during your winter rains, the grains of wheat and barley are sprouting. And then you have the latter rains, which are in March and the first half of April. And towards the latter part of the rains in April, you begin harvesting barley. And barley heads first because it only requires 8 inches of rain. And then right on its heels, roughly a month later during the month of May, you have wheat is being harvested because it requires the 12 inches of rain. And then after the wheat and the barley have been harvested, the fields lie fallow. And it is during this time, from roughly June to October, that flocks are allowed to be in the fields, because once everything is harvested, the flock is now able to graze on the stubble. And what's more, the sheep and the goats leave behind the necessary fertilizer to enrich the soil that allows it to go forward in the next sowing season. And so when we are told that we have flocks who are in the fields, it lets us know that we are outside of harvest season or even the growing season. And the added bonus of being told that it's at night helps us to realize that we are dealing with somewhere between June through October. There is no way, based on what the text is telling us, that you have flocks that are in the field on December 25th. That is during your heavy winter rains. It is very cold in and around Bethlehem in the high hill country. You're dealing with 30s and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It is rainy, wet, soggy, chilly. You do not have flocks there. You do have flocks that are in the fields after the harvesting season. And some of you are probably then thinking, okay, but you said that if these are village shepherds and they're taking flocks out and bringing them back, why are they out in the fields at night? Why are they not in a sheepfold? Why are they not being protected? Because predators are an issue at night. And those are all really great questions. And the answer is, we don't know exactly what's going on. Maybe they're eating in the fields and they're right next to a sheepfold. Maybe it is a full moon, and when you have zero light pollution, a full moon lights up the landscape in a way that you can see everything just fine. Maybe you have multiple shepherds and they're completely comfortable with allowing the sheep to graze in the field. There's a lot of reasons why this could be. Maybe it's a really small flock. We don't know. But what is almost for certain is that it can't be December 25th, which begs the question, how in the world did we get December 25th? And Paul Wright, in a very distilled way in the ESV Archaeology Study Bible, just writes this. Since the mid-4th century AD, Jesus' birth has been celebrated in Western churches on December 25th. This date, which corresponds generally to the winter solstice, was perhaps chosen by the church in Rome as a witness against popular pagan sun festivals celebrated in late December. Now, some of you know this, and it's actually a very complicated process for understanding how we got December 25th, and we're going to hyperlink an article under this video at walkingthetext.com that will allow you to read about the various options, but Paul Wright does a great way of just distilling it down, and the best understanding that we have is it's somehow connected to the winter solstice and the sun festivals in the pagan world, which I know for many of you makes you wonder, then why in the world are we celebrating it on December 25th? And my response would be this. I don't think that we should do away with December 25th for a couple of reasons. One is we don't know when Jesus was born. I mean, you're just picking a date probably somewhere between June and October, and the text doesn't tell us when Jesus is born on a specific day. Secondly, and probably most importantly, is that December 25th is the date that people come together to celebrate the birth of Jesus. And when we come to celebrate the birth of Jesus, we're not celebrating the day per se, we're celebrating the fact that Jesus came, that he was willing to leave the confines of heaven to enter into our experience. And as our culture celebrates it around December 25th, as families and friends come together to celebrate, let's celebrate collectively the coming of Jesus Christ, knowing that it's not December 25th, but December 25th is the date that everybody comes together in order to celebrate this amazing reality. So those are my thoughts on that. Now, some of you have actually already written in, you've already contacted us, and you've already asked us about this. Something that has become really popular in the last several years has been this idea that when we talk about these types of shepherds and we talk about village shepherds, some of you know that there is this idea that they weren't simply village shepherds, that they were actually temple shepherds connected to a place called Migdal Eder, which in Hebrew means Tower of the Flock. And again, Dr. Paul Wright, somebody I respect greatly, does a great job of talking about this in the Lexham Geographic Commentary of the Gospels. And he just says this, he says rabbinic sources, and he references the Mishnah here, written roughly 200 AD, indicate that certain fields at Migdal Eder, literally watchtower of the flock, southeast of Bethlehem, were reserved year-round as places where animals that were intended for temple sacrifice were raised. Such shepherds were, it is often supposed, more ritually clean than common shepherds, and hence more fitting to be the ones chosen by the angels to visit the infant Jesus. John the Baptist calls Jesus the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And while it may be theologically tempting to associate his birth with shepherds who are already connected to the ritual temple service, this can in no way be proven. So it's a really great idea, and it's been promoted a lot, but his final thought on it can't be proven, I agree wholeheartedly with. It's something that can be posited, it just can't be proven. And I want to help you to understand this a little bit more, because some of you are going to say, yeah, but what about the Micah passages? And Micah 5:2 talks about Bethlehem. We talked about this a little bit in part 1. But it is from Bethlehem, you shall come forth for me one who is to be the ruler in Israel, that the coming king was going to be connected to Bethlehem. And so obviously we know this is Jesus, but then what happens is people go earlier in Micah in chapter 4, verse 8, and they say, see, this is talking about Bethlehem because we have, and you, O Tower of the Flock, again in Hebrew, Migdal Eder, Hill of the daughter of Zion. To you shall it come, the former dominion shall come, kingship for the daughter of Jerusalem. Now just notice here that this is in the context of Jerusalem, not Bethlehem. Zion is a reference to Jerusalem. We have Jerusalem here in 4:8. And when people are saying, yeah, but Tower of the Flock was a place near Bethlehem where the temple shepherds were, and they're keeping watch over the lambs that were going to be in the temple, they see this passage as a reference to Bethlehem. But the problem is the entire context is Jerusalem. And one of the things that people miss is actually this word hill, talking about hill in Zion, is the word Ophel, which means hill or stronghold. And Daniel Master, in the Zondervan Illustrated Bible Backgrounds Commentary of the Old Testament, says this: the term Ophel was an architectural term denoting the acropolis on which the citadel of the city was placed. In Jerusalem, this high point was located at the north end of the city of David, just south of the Temple Mount. And there's actually a location called the Ophel, and here is it. So when you look at this passage, the context is in Jerusalem, not 6 miles or 7 miles away, wherever Migdal Eder would have been. We know it was really close to Bethlehem. And so it's a great idea. It just can't be proven. But then some of you will go, yeah, but weren't the lambs at Migdal Eder wrapped in swaddling clothes in order to protect them so that they wouldn't become blemished and therefore not used in the temple service? Well done, that's a great thought. But where that's coming from is that in Luke 2:12, the angels say to the shepherds, "And this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." And people want to say, see, there's that connection to the lambs at Migdal Eder. Well, notice here that when it says this will be a sign for you, two things are referenced here. And when it comes to the wrapped in cloths, that's actually what was expected of any baby to be wrapped in. You see this in Ezekiel 16:4, that there is a metaphorical reference going on here, but it's got a literal connection. As for your birth, on the day you were born, your navel cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water for cleansing. You were not rubbed with salt or even wrapped in cloths. This is what happens when babies are born. They're wrapped in cloths. And so, when it says wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger, I actually think that the sign is more the second one, because this is expected. And when you have 4 verses later in Luke, it says, "And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger." It says nothing about wrapped in cloths. And so the sign seems to be lying in a manger, and you go, well, what kind of a sign is that? Well, we explored in the very first episode about the housing complex and the feeding trough and why this could be in the middle of the living room. I think the sign for the shepherds is that Jesus is coming among the common people. That when the shepherds find Jesus, and by the way, we mentioned that Bethlehem was maybe 500, 1,000 people. I mean, think about this. If the shepherds are showing up in the village, how many people actually would have given birth to a baby boy that night? You've got 365 days out of the year. You have a 50% chance of a boy or a girl. I mean, how many baby boys were actually birthed that night in Bethlehem? And in a village context, everybody knows everybody's business. When the shepherds show up, everybody knows who just had a baby. And if multiple people did, then maybe at most the shepherds would have gone to 1 or 2 other homes before showing up here. So I don't think it was, oh, there's a manger, that's it. I think it has more to do that Jesus was not found in a governor's house or in a mansion, but he was found within a common home as someone who came for even common people. And I believe that this would have resonated for these shepherds, because many of you know that in the first century world, shepherds were very low on the social ladder. In fact, shepherding was a despised vocation. And it's really interesting because we don't entirely know what happened between the Older Testament and the Newer Testament. Because in the Older Testament, I mean, you've got David who was a shepherd. You know, God is called a shepherd in Psalm 23. Like, shepherd is something that is positive. It is something that is used all throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. But then you get into the New Testament, and what we learn is that even in rabbinic sources, shepherds were not to be trusted. They were a despised people group. They were a lower caste, if you will. And yet, the good news of the coming of Jesus was first and foremost given to lowly shepherds. And I just love how Kenneth Bailey puts it. He just says this, and he just distills this so well, and I just want to end with this. He says, this is the capstone to the story of the shepherds. The child was born for the likes of the shepherds, the poor, the lowly, the rejected. The shepherds were welcomed at the manger. The unclean were judged to be clean. The outcast became honored guests. The song of the angels was sung to the simplest of all. What a beautiful summary of the significance of the shepherds, who are characters of this Christmas story, who are invited into an awareness that Jesus came even for the lowliest of shepherds. And what we're going to see in the next episode is that there was a span, that from the lowliest of Jews, the shepherds, to the wealthiest of the Gentiles and everyone in between, Jesus came for all people. And we celebrate during this Christmas season that the announcement was first given to the shepherds, who were in the fields keeping watch over their flock at night, and out of nowhere, everything changed for them. And so, friends, there you go. Another episode in Characters of Christmas. May this continue to enrich your Christmas season as you just ponder the significance of Jesus coming, who he came for, how he came, and what that means for us in our lives today. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening. Just know we've got a ton of resources for you to go deeper with in your study under this video at walkingthetext.com. And as always, may you walk out the text well in your life.